You can look at it by location too, proximity payment versus remote payment. So again, technology here differs, but proximity is where the devices have to be together to make a payment, so the people are either at a location or bumping phones or keep checking their phones together, or a remote approach where you're doing a remittance, you're doing an m-commerce from a remote vendor, or you're buying ancillary services remotely as well. And those are cloud services for sure. The first group could be NFC, could be cloud-driven, could be driven by a lot of different methodologies. And obviously by customer. So we tend to, everybody who talks about mobile wallets tend to think about the consumer holding the mobile wallet, but there's a whole universe of merchants who need to accept the method of payment. And I truly don't think a wallet solution can strive and succeed and be universally accepted unless you can also pay with it at stores. If it ends up being just a P2P approach, it's not going to have the same traction. If you remember the early days of PayPal, they came up as a P2P email money to a friend type of process where if people want to share a dinner bill, they used to manage it that way. And it didn't get a lot of traction. It started getting traction when it joined eBay and when it was used as a method to settle payments to vendors. And now it's one of the biggest vendor payment or merchant processing companies in the world. So the solution, I think, has to incorporate both sides. Are they here yet? I'm not going to spend too much time here, but in essence, you all know the numbers. There's 2.5 times more phones in the world than there are bank accounts. So the potential to bank people and the potential to offer financial services to people is tremendous. We all know it because a lot of us offer financial services for the unbanked. Smartphone penetration is up, so that's going to help because in countries where it's more of a convenience factor and there's a high bankarization factor, you have to find a solution that's multi-uses, that's interesting, that's cool for the consumer to use, and smartphone is the best way to deliver this. The volumes are coming up. One of the things that I'm a little dubious of is a lot of the projections differ a lot. So if you look at the IE market research, they think we'll hit $1.1 trillion by 2014. If you look at Juniper, they tell you it's going to be $670 billion by 2015. So the numbers differ, but we're talking about hundreds of billions of dollars of payments in the next 2 to 3 years. So it's definitely on the rise. And if you look at some of the examples in some of the success countries where it has happened, and I know Fred will share with us his numbers in a little bit, there's some very, very good traction. And not to forget that a lot of the consumer trends follow generational shifts. So, we're seeing a new generation enter the workforce that has grown up on mobile phones. Anybody who has kids know that it's easier, instead of calling them to come for dinner, you have to text them. So it is literally the most intimate, the closer device that they have. It's how they communicate with friends. It's how they expect to make a lot of things in the future. They browse the internet, and I'm sure they're going to expect payments to be part of it. So that generational shift, I think, is going to accelerate the movement towards more solutions on mobile, including payments. Some of the notable initiatives, and if you look at, we talked about NFC a little earlier. So Google Wallet just made an announcement that they were making some partnerships. And it's interesting because Google is trying to bank on their social networking power that they're starting to build to compete with Facebook on the payment piece, as well as on the couponing discount piece. So they're trying to converge all these three into basically a terrific consumer shopping experience where you can receive advertisements on your phone, coupons, go to a store, have the coupon automatically be included in your payment, pay through your phone, have the transaction yet be communicated to your social network so you can get your friends to go and buy the same product and make it a virtuous circle. So that's going to be very interesting, but again, it's NFC driven, so in essence, it'll go as fast as NFC goes in the country. Another very important initiative is ISIS, which is the three major telco operators in the US have created a JV to push NFC payments as well onto onto merchants. And what's interesting about ISIS is they're talking about subsidizing the program. So that's going to help accelerate the change very quickly. The card companies are also big players in that. Visa has PayWave, MasterCard has PayPass. They're pushing hard. they think that by having them run the NFC game at merchants, they'll be against the intermediaries for global payments at retail as well as for P2P, because everything will be driven through their networks. So that's something to watch for, and a big push. They have dozens of programs depending on the countries, and they're testing a lot of different approaches and technologies. So there's definitely going to be success in there. Some of the things we talk less about, I mean, people seem to forget about iTunes. iTunes was really, on iPhone, one of the first mobile payment methods where you link your credit card to your iTunes account, and you're on your phone, and you can start downloading songs or buying applications. And one day they could get into m-commerce, and they already have hundreds of millions of accounts online in iTunes. So for them to move into any area that takes mobile payments is a very easy move. PayPal, which keeps making announcements in that space. Obviously, I mentioned they bought Zong lately, but they have a very interesting app to send and receive money online. They have it on the phones, with smartphones. They have an SMS application for it, and they have the bump technology. And I mentioned Starbucks as well. So I'm mentioning a few examples here, so you can go online later, and if you feel like you want to investigate more. But we obviously have people who are going to talk about their solutions a little later. I just didn't want to steal their thunder, and they'll tell you more about some of their successes. So this is interesting in developed markets, and the challenge in developed markets is that people are highly banked, and there's no really strong demand for a mobile wallet for the purpose of accessing financial services. So all these people are working really hard at figuring out the coolest way to attract the customer. What is going to make a difference so that consumers start adopting mobile wallets? It's a little easier when you talked about developing markets, and that's why we saw some early traction in those markets. So with a random number of clicks, this is just how ISIS is looking at combining services on the chip. On developing markets, you've probably all heard M-Pesa. M-Pesa is kind of the example that's used everywhere about the success in mobile. They're probably up to 13 million account holder so far, 30,000 merchants, and they've banked 60% of the country, in a country where the banking penetration was under 30% before 2007 when they started. So in only 5 years, little under 5 years, they made tremendous progress. A company called Fundamo that, by the way, just got acquired by Visa a few months ago, has also made some progress in South Africa. Globe and Smart in the Philippines. Globe and Smart have more accounts than all the banks in the Philippines today. So tremendous traction. And IT, where Chocho Mobile, there's two initiatives actually, one with Digicel and one with Voila. And Chocho Mobile is the one with Digicel, and that's the one that's taken a little more traction. They've started, really the effort was pushed by the Gates Initiative, where they put a prize, and the first company to achieve, I believe it was 10,000 payments at 100 different non-bank, non-financial service participant location would get a prize. And it pushed a lot of companies to develop solutions. This one was between Scotiabank, Digicel, and Yellow Pepper. And now it's almost ubiquitous in IT. Payments are happening on it, and they also used it as a way to funnel payments to all the AIDS workers that were in Haiti, so that they don't have to go through a lot of cash movements and incur the risk of shipping money. There's also a lot happening on the global infrastructure, and we'll talk about this on the panel as well, but as you can see, a lot of different solutions, a lot of different technologies, and a lot of different companies, and a lot of different ecosystem operators are becoming the predominant player in a lot of these applications. And none of them look the same, and none of them necessarily talk to one another. So what's going to happen when you start talking about sending money from the UK to Kenya, from the US to Kenya? Well, there's mobile wallets operating in silo environment, but there are companies now that are starting to look at how do we bring all this together and create a sort of interchange between all these wallets. And two things could happen. To the extent that there's a technology provider that grows enough and has enough implementations to become kind of a lead, they could end up being one of the interchange systems. But there are companies also that are working really hard and making a lot of progress. Bix is one of them, and Frederic will tell us a little later about how they're doing. Western Union is another one. So Western Union now has a partner program where they connect all the wallets around the world. I don't think they'll end up as an interchange just because they're strictly using it for money transfer, and obviously the prices are high, and they want to use their brand. I think chances are stronger that it'll be either a telco association, a technology provider, or maybe even one of the current card companies that comes up with an inexpensive interchange system where everybody can connect to and start exchanging value. I mean, SWIFT potentially could play a role in that ecosystem as well. But that's going to be essential to the development of global remittances. Otherwise, we're going to be left to our own device, which is what we usually do. We set up a wallet on our end, the payer sets up a wallet on their end, and we interface. And we interface on a bilateral type of deal-making where with each payer, you have to go through a separate interface procedure and operate on a separate protocol. So this remains to be developed, but there's a lot of efforts in that direction. So what I think I'd love to hear more about, especially at the panel this afternoon, is how do we go over the challenges that we all think about? How do we get wallets in the hand of consumers? Why should they take them? What's the value it's going to add? How would the pricing look like? How do we market it? How do we market it to people who are not necessarily very technology inclined, and so on and so forth? Regulation. Who's going to regulate it? How it's going to be ran? Is it going to be ran like prepaid? Is it going to be a separate type of regulation? We're just hearing now that the regulators are looking at making prepaid and mobile a financial instrument in many countries, defined as a financial instrument, which will now change the regulatory environment for these efforts. Profitability. So in an ecosystem where not necessarily all the roles are defined, definitely not on a global basis, and different people are trying for different spots in the ecosystem, who makes what? Can it be disruptive? Can it be sold at a price that is attractive enough to create consumer traction? Or is it going to be a convenience service and carry the same fees that a normal money transfer or a normal prepaid card carries? These things remain to be discovered, but as today our speakers talk about their solutions, they'll shed some light on how it's worked in some countries, and I think that will help us learn a lot how it's worked and what's being successful. And then, what does it do to us? Could potentially a global mobile ecosystem disintermediate Visa, MasterCard? Could it disintermediate money transfer as an industry? Can we be part of that? And how should we play our cards? And then other questions that may come up. So please feel free throughout the day. I would encourage you to elaborate on questions you may have. And there's really no simple question in this environment, because even the people who have been spending years looking at this still have a lot of questions on how this could be implemented. I'll also tell you there's a lot of interest from technology and mobile players in the money transfer industry, because especially in the US and in Europe, you tackle the underbanked, and the underbanked are kind of the prime market for a financial solution that can work when you don't have a bank account. And you have marketed financial services very successfully in markets that are very hard to reach. They're non-traditional, they don't reached by normal channels, so there's interest on both sides. And as we go through the day, write down questions. It could be the most basic to the most elaborate. We'll be happy to answer them around the panel. But this is, I think, a great chance for us to all learn more about it and start preparing our strategies.